All right, hello everyone. This is Nathaniel Kidd here at Whatcom Love INC, and I've got Heidi Olson, who is our call center director here on the line with us. Now, Heidi, you were telling me recently a story that seemed very much in the middle lane of the value that Love INC provides churches and provides the community. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to just have a chat and a little check-in, and so that other people who are interested can hear the story of sort of like how God works through what we do. So can you give us a little bit, just in general terms, of what the situation was like?
We had a individual contact not only Love INC, but had initially contacted a handful of churches. And I had a conversation with the individual about opportunities for shelter, financial assistance. The individual was looking for hotel vouchers, which is not sustainable. There were no long-term plans for housing. The individual is not able to stay at the shelter. So I list plans, including opportunities with the state, possibly giving further assistance through signing up for Social Security or disability, or the person even had access to VA, so that's another opportunity for this person, and work source opportunities, connections in getting temporary employment or long-term employment. So the list went on, and the person was not extremely open to any of that. The person just wanted to have churches hand out hotel vouchers so that they could remain in the hotel that they were at. Following that conversation and multiple conversations with surrounding churches, I got contacted about a week later about the same individual from a church that had not dealt with this person, and was concerned because they did not know what to do and how to approach it. And the individual had physically gone to the church location. So they had met with the individual and felt obligated to help. Once we spoke, and I was able to fill them in on the fact that the individual was going from church to church looking for the hotel voucher opportunity, and we had given extensive other options for this person. The church felt more, would you say, was reassured and able to reaffirm those options and not have to feel obligated to help in a way that they weren't comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And that was just one opportunity to be able to connect with a church that was not sure what to do. I have dealt with those situations multiple times. This one in particular was quite extensive, but we were able to come to a conclusion that was helpful, giving the church security and coordination, and the individual some additional support as well.
Right. Great. So, I mean, how often, I know that people often will comment from a church perspective, you know, they're grateful for Love INC because it means we can identify when somebody is just sort of like calling around and, you know, kind of like trying to take advantage of churches, right? You know, without any sort of, how often would you say that sort of thing happens from your observation?
I don't think that it happens as often as people think. However, it does exist.
Yeah.
And I would say less than 10% of the time, there are individuals that are either re- repeating a process for legitimate reasons,
Mhm.
that they're not able to access enough resources for their specific situation. But there are also those that are just going from one to the next, to the next, to the next,
Mhm.
um, burning all those bridges
Mhm.
as they go along to collect the funds that they feel that they will support them.
Yeah. Well, it is helpful when there is somebody who's behaving mischievously, right? To have
Yeah.
kind of central repository or central node of connection like Love Inc.
Hmm.
Definitely a good thing. And the wisdom and experience you've accumulated in dealing with multiple of these peoples, like that's definitely a benefit.
Yeah.
Even when that's a rare occurrence, and I think it's actually part of our educational role to tell churches like, okay, yes, refer to us because we might have some other insights, or we might, be able to flag somebody who's demonstrating problematic behavior. But you can generally assume that most people are not just out to fleece you.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
does not happen very frequently.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I think that, and as you sort of were pointing out, that more often than not, when somebody is calling around, it's because they have a need, and that there is no system that will supply their need, right? And
Mhm.
that's not taking advantage of churches. That's a fairly legitimate way of trying to solve, like being proactive and trying to solve a problem when
Yes.
there is no resource that exists.
Yeah.
And that's a very frustrating. We can have some empathy for people in those and compassion for people in those situations. That's like, man, that's a really tough place to be in.
Mhm.
And the social safety net isn't so much a safety net as it is like a bunch of swinging ropes, and hopefully you can cling onto one and
Yes.
grab for dear life, and then maybe climb your way back up. But in general, like the way that we function as Love Inc. and as a network of churches is we want to see people brought into relationship in the life of the church, and we want to see, we strongly preference, the reason we don't like people calling around to all these churches is not because they don't have a legitimate need, but because we believe that their stability and their resilience will come from having a community that they can connect with on a deeper level, and having that community love them well, which
Mhm.
includes being a support in times of need, right?
Yes.
um, that's the way it should work. Now, that doesn't, like, churches don't always have the resources, and some people's level of need is so high that it becomes challenging. And so in those situations, Love Inc. is there as well to say, look, here's an individual, they're plugged into this church. That church has kind of been run dry because of just the magnitude of need, or like they've hit their limit. Um, and this is not a this is a need where we can invest, and it will increase this person's capacity. It's not a chronic need that's going to be forever, right?
Mhm.
And so can we all gather around to help in this situation? And that's a huge blessing. Like that can make the difference between a person continuing down a cycle into an ever more difficult to solve problem, and coming to a place of stability. And like, we have opportunities as the church to serve in that way that other agencies, because there are all kinds of bureaucratic rules and grant funding rules and government rules about how these things need to be discharged, that they don't have the sort of flexibility and nimbleness to address things in that way. um, and so it's beautiful to kind of see how like your discernment works in helping to connect those dots, and how how churches can work and work together. And along with that too, we also want to see people in relationships, and we want to see them making use of where there's the programs that operate for them, that they're making
Mhm.
use of those resources, because the margins that churches have to do this kind of compassion work is not is not infinite, right? And so we want to see what's sort of like the entitlement use first, Um, and you know, I guess churches can disagree with that, and if you want to pay somebody else's bill, like that's not what we recommend, but you know, they have the freedom to do that too. Um, and there are sometimes reasons that people won't want to use a resource that is available to them, and you know, like again, because the first priority is that relationship, right? There's an opportunity there. Um, so yeah, I mean, this is a way that we fit into the whole ecosystem of service, like navigating between churches and you know the services that are available for people in the community, and can play a coordinating and mediating role for people in need. Um, how does that affect, you know, like you talked about some of these people who you know, the request is raised from this individual to leaders in the churches. How does it affect the church leaders to be able to work with you?
How does it affect the church leaders to work with me? I think, I hope I'm answering this correctly. In relation to this particular situation, it brings, it adds to the relationship. There's more collaboration. There's the ability, I'm thinking of another one with a smaller church out in the county as well, where I was able to not only give them advice and kind of walk with them and the individual, but it empowers them where they're not feeling overwhelmed, because especially with everything going on, even within their own congregation, it can seem overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Specifically when you're approached again and again from a family or an individual and not really knowing how to navigate it.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if you're not throughout the conversation learning more about the family, you're able to still walk with the person and offer some other options.
Yeah.
Specifically with the one that we brought up, maybe helping them navigate the state system or encouraging them in some other way that will support the person so they don't feel so, what happens, it seems a lot, is kind of, it's a long process even to go through a state system or a VA system or anything like that. So people get a bit stunted and nothing happens because
Mm-hmm.
they're avoiding it because it's a long process or the paperwork is daunting.
Mm-hmm.
So even having the church be able to help in that way and loop us in, I can do more of the research component and mediate between the two, which enhances the relationship with not only the individual and the church, but it's like more of a family type connection,
Mm-hmm.
which then they're more apt to come back and use this in the future. I feel like, which just furthers that relationship.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and there's a basic problem that I think every church faces, which is, you know, how do you do compassion sustainably, right? Because, you know, I think there's many people have the experience of, I encountered a need, I encountered a neighbor in need, and I tried to help, and I got in over my head, and so now I don't ever want to do it again. Or we had something set up, and you know, I remember hearing, you know, somebody told me about a like an auto repair, like a retired guy who just liked to repair cars,
Mm-hmm.
and he sort of informally opened that up, and he's like, well, anybody in need who wants to have their car repaired. I think he had just sort of like even an informal team of other mechanics who helped with this, but sort of word got around, and it got so great that, like, you know, he wasn't able to, like, this is my retirement hobby, like I don't want to work more than full time for free.
Yeah.
So, you know, this underlying question of like, how do we build sustainable compassion systems which help us to walk with people in need without killing us, right? That we can continue to make a difference in a way that we are able to sustain, because that consistency, particularly for people in need whose lives are so upended by circumstance,
Mm-hmm.
that need for consistency, something that you can rely on, even if it's small, can be so powerful. It can be sort of the lifeline, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess what have you witnessed in terms of what helps to make compassion work sustainable? and where have you seen it, not work out in terms of the sustainability?
It's not an easy process. I think a lot of it comes from experience and being some exposure, but not overwhelming exposure. So there would be a very important boundary-based system there. Of course, there's always exceptions, but I think the boundary part is so important, and then having resources beyond those boundaries. I can't do this for you, but guess what? I'll be able to do this for you. And maybe it's not in a financial state, but walking with them to contact a landlord or a utility, or again, we're going back to different processes, but keeping those boundaries in place. What happens a lot of the time, and has happened with me quite often, is you can get wrapped up with one individual or multiple, and it can easily cause burnout, which is like the mechanic. In the end, you've maybe were able to help this handful of individuals. Maybe you weren't completely, but you're so involved with not only the one thing that you're doing for them, but the whole big picture. Poverty a lot of times looks a specific way, and if you get so involved in it, you're wanting to fix every component of their life. And I have found that just helping them in some way is so important and powerful, brings hope, and they often are not seeing it the way you're seeing it. They're seeing that help as genuinely wonderful, and you don't have to fix their entire situation, but you can still walk alongside them. When the boundaries fall away, it can be so emotionally draining. We have seen time and time again, and especially during this season that we're in, where there's so much going on in the world and so many different crises, people really, really wanting to help, but then getting that tunnel vision, per se, that they are, just recently had one family so focused on helping that family, and then realizing that that was not the only one. So once the word got out, just again, back with the mechanic, flooded with more people in need, and not really realizing that, oh, it's not just a food issue. It's utilities and rent and clothing and furniture, and just not really encompassing that thought process of, wow, there's a lot of need here. I can't do it all. And then having that weight on your shoulders and carrying it with you, and just it's draining you and draining you and draining you. And then pretty soon the volunteers and everybody that's wanting to help are kind of dwindling off because they're so tired. Have seen that a lot. I've even experienced some of that myself. I think the best way that I've been able to navigate, not only with God's help and prayer and just the support system that I have in place through Love Inc. and other church coordinators, and I just feel like I'm surrounded by a big family that I can bounce things off. I can have that input. And also that's what I'm here for other people, to be able to, because I've been contacted by a few of those, how do you do it? Well, so I don't know if that's extremely helpful, but I think the biggest thing that comes to mind is boundaries, and having that empathy mixed in with that, being able to not see it as an entire enormous Empire State Building project, and just helping with that one piece. Here's one piece of the puzzle, and knowing in your mind that that is what they asked for. Like, instead of, wow, did you see their house and their yard and the neighborhood they live in? They don't have a car, and you can just have all that in your head, and pretty soon it's all consuming.
Right. Yeah. Well, so I mean, there are three things that come to mind for me. One is, there's that immediate circumstance of, there was, in response to the COVID-19 crisis, sort of this immediate flood of people of goodwill, right? And people wanting to do something. And there was a lot of activity, and that lasted about 2 months.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, people's got to go back to work. Some people were really involved and burned themselves out on it, or didn't know how to kind of sustain that. And we would really love to see, like that, the needs didn't come with COVID.
No.
And they're not going to get any, they're not getting any better, actually, although in a general sense, I think almost accidentally, right? Like, I think average household worth or income increased over this because of the government response, but then there are a whole bunch of other problems, and like that's coming to an end. So what's next? So we've been spared the brunt of it, but we just are still holding our breath to see like what's coming.
Yes.
And in a way, like, because there was sort of that shock, we were all in shock together, and a lot of people's first inclination in going into shock, and it's beautiful, it's good, it gives me a lot of hope to see people see that, and they say, how can I help, right? But the problem is not people responding, but that sort of sustained compassion is really what's needed. And so building it in, how do we build compassion into our lives? Like part of our routine. Now, second piece then is the problem that churches face, right? Is, you've talked about the importance of the boundaries, and say like, I can't do that for you. I can do this for you. And so we're going to do this, and I'm not going to do that. Right. Yeah. But at the same time, there's a tension almost between desiring to have sort of a family relationship, right? And having those boundaries, right? Because family relationships, maybe this is probably, gets into my family experience but family relationships, like people will do anything for their children, right? That they wouldn't do for other people. And so there's a tension between like what the church is ultimately offering is that network of relationships, and that network of relationships then implies giving. And so how do you both have like relationship and also have the strong boundaries of saying like, well, actually, no, I can't pay your rent, or I can't fix your laundry list of problems, right? But that doesn't mean that I don't want to help, right? And so I think that's a tension, and that's a challenge that churches face, and you just have to keep navigating it. There's no way around that problem. It's just always there, right? And it's always a judgment call. And I don't know, like, it can always be criticized on both sides, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, I think that this is why a network of encouragement, you were talking about that too, in terms of part of your practice, like that network of encouragement is so important. And just to be able to talk about different situations that you're facing, is with other people who get it because they're committed to doing that work. Like that's super important too. The community of practice. And then, you know, the third thing is like, and a lot of people don't like to hear this, but we try to make systematic problems individual problems, right? Like, you know, there are certain issues of just like basic justice, you know, that can never be solved by changing individual behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
And if you try, it will kill you. You know, like an example is like, we're never going to solve pollution by stopping, by recycling more, right? There's a bigger systematic problem. And, you know, there's a way in which like our attempt to address the systematic problem is really sort of a rehearsal of our awareness that the problem exists more than it is contributing to the solution. And so when I guess as we are seeking to help people find those practices of compassion to integrate into their daily life, we want those to be done in a way where, okay, we're drawing attention to some of the bigger issues that do need a more systemic response, right? That I guess something like Alice, right? And you know that we should join in United Way and some of the other voices in Whatcom County that are drawing attention to this group of people. Alice is the acronym, the asset limited income constrained employed, right? People that are working, but that aren't making enough to sustain themselves, right? Like there's something that's going wrong systemically. That there is like, what do you remember the statistic? It's like 40% of people, and that's not including the people that are like below the poverty line, right?
Yeah, it might even be slightly higher than that, but it's pretty high. Or it seems high if you think of a number like 40%.
Right, and the reality that, like, for instance, I read recently in the Herald that like Bellingham is one of the most expensive places to live in the country, relative between how much it costs to live here versus how much you can make working a normal job.
Yeah.
And so like these are huge systemic problems, and you know we need a strong ecosystem of support for people in our community to make this an inhabitable place for people who live here. And we also need to have honest conversations, dreaming together, praying together, and working together towards solutions on a systemic level. And this is kind of a journey that I'm just beginning myself. You know, like these become really complicated questions, and you know they can become intense and heated. But like, and this is part of why, for me, the role of the church in here is absolutely essential. It's in a church, the church setting, where it's like, you know, we can disagree with one another very passionately in terms of the kind of systemic solutions that are necessary, but like we are part of the same family. We're committed to one another, and we're committed to sort of to working this through. You know, I don't think we've approached things that way in the church historically. I think it's become like you have progressive churches and you have conservative churches. You know, we just divide on those ideological lines. But the promise of going beyond just, you know, our church-based tribalisms into saying like, you know, we have this unity with one another as members of the body of Christ, who are his presence in the world, that stretches all the way from giving the cup of cold water to the poor, to confronting kings, and praying against the powers and principalities that dominate this dark age and work destruction on human image bearers, and that we can deepen our practice and our advocacy both. And it's a long way to go, but it's good, and God is with us, and he promises to bring his kingdom. And so that we yearn for, we hope for, we struggle. We're all imperfect, and we trust in God's goodness along the way. Good. Well, it's exciting. I'm always grateful for the work that you do. It's kind of different than the work that I do.
Yeah.
But I think having that differentiation within the body, from sort of the division in Acts between the deacons and those who are set aside for the preaching and teaching of the word, right? That there is that sort of differentiation in the body, which is important. And I felt like our dynamic has been really healthy and beautiful and growing over the time. So it's a joy to work with you and to learn from you and see how the Lord is at work in the work that He's given you to do, and hopefully. I've said before, like I just want to build a platform so that the church can learn from you in this county, because of the important work that you're doing. So, would you pray for us here, and then we can adjourn.
Lord, I just lift up today to you. Just want to thank you for just your goodness and your grace, your mercy, your kindness, Lord, and just your wonderful encouragement throughout our existence here on earth, Lord. I ask that you continue to help us in the days ahead, navigating through each moment, Lord, helping others, reaching out, encouraging words, support, Lord. Often we can not know exactly what support looks like, Lord, but you are there to lift us up, to walk with us, to hold our hand. Lord, I just want to thank you for this meeting this morning and being able to express to the community and churches and partners and organizations and families out there, Lord, how we are reaching out to the community, helping churches, helping individuals and families, those in need, working with organizations and coordinating with each other. And Lord, it's just a wonderful opportunity and wonderful employment that I have experienced. And I just love being able to help in some way individuals and families, organizations and churches, Lord. Thank you for the support system we have with each other here at Love Inc. I ask your hand upon Nathaniel as well today. Just want to thank you for the support that I have and that he has. And as we go forth today, I just ask for your continued grace and encouragement. And we love you. In your name, amen.
Amen. All right. Thanks so much, Heidi.